Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a massive historical question. How did Christianity even start? But we're going to approach this in a really specific way. Not by getting into faith debates, but by looking only at the historical facts that a huge majority of scholars, including the really skeptical ones, all agree are true.
Okay, so let's just dive right into the central puzzle. You have a movement whose leader dies in the most shameful, humiliating way possible in the ancient world. Logically, that should have been the end of the story, but instead, it just exploded. From a purely historical standpoint, how on earth is that possible?
So we really have to start by wrapping our heads around this central contradiction. The source material calls it the paradox of a failed Messiah. And in that first-century world, a story like this just shouldn't have had a sequel.
I mean, you've got to understand, crucifixion wasn't just a way to kill someone. It was political theater. It was designed to publicly humiliate you, crush your movement, and basically erase you from history. So for any group claiming their leader was the Messiah, chosen victorious king, this was the ultimate undeniable proof that they had failed. Game over.
But that's not what happened at all. The followers of this crucified leader didn't just scatter and go home. Instead, something happened that took this symbol of ultimate defeat and turned it into the #1 talking point of their message. So the real question is, what historical event could possibly explain such a radical 180-degree turn?
Okay, so to investigate a question like that fairly, the sources we're looking at basically lay out some ground rules. The goal here isn't to prove a miracle. The goal is to build a case using only the historical facts that almost everyone agrees on. Any good theory has to be able to explain those facts.
It's called the minimalist approach, and the idea is pretty simple. We strip away everything that people argue about and focus only on a small core of facts that have this wide consensus. The point isn't to prove something supernatural, but simply to show that something happened back then that is so unusual it demands a really powerful explanation.
So, where do we get our first clues? Well, our earliest and most solid evidence actually comes from a source you might not expect. It's even older than the four Gospels.
Our star witness, historically speaking, is the Apostle Paul. His letters are considered authentic by pretty much every historian out there, and they were written in the 50s AD. That gives us an incredible early snapshot of what the first Christians believed. And this is key. He wasn't some outsider writing decades later. He personally knew the original leaders in Jerusalem, people like Peter and James.
Now look at this timeline. It is incredibly tight. The crucifixion happens around 30 AD, and by the mid-50s, Paul is already writing about these established Christian beliefs. But here's the really crucial detail. Inside his own letters, he's quoting material that's even older than that.
And this is it. In his letter to the church in Corinth, Paul quotes what scholars recognize as a very, very early creed. The key phrase here is "what I received." That's huge. It means this wasn't his idea. He's passing on a formal tradition that was already being recited. Historians date this creed to within just a few years, maybe even months, of the crucifixion itself. And that's critical, because it shows that the belief in the resurrection wasn't some legend that grew over decades. It was there right from the absolute beginning.
So, this incredibly early evidence is what helps historians lock down what the source calls 4 bedrock historical facts. These are the non-negotiable data points, the core of the case that any theory about how Christianity started simply has to explain. And here they are. These are the 4 pillars of the historical argument: the crucifixion itself, the immediate proclamation that followed, the very specific claims of appearances, and of course, the explosive growth of the movement. So let's just quickly touch on why each of these is considered so solid.
First up, the crucifixion. Honestly, among professional historians, Christian or not, this is not a matter of serious debate. It's considered as historically certain as pretty much any event from the ancient world.
Second, the proclamation of his resurrection. Now again, historians aren't being asked to believe in the miracle itself. What they do grant as a historical fact is that this claim was the central, non-negotiable, driving force of the Christian message from day one. And they weren't talking about his spirit living on, they were talking about a bodily resurrection.
Third, and this is a big one, these beliefs were grounded in claims of appearances to specific, named people. As we saw in that early creed, they weren't just saying, hey, he's alive. They were saying he appeared to Peter, then to the 12, then to over 500 people. This basically functioned as a witness list. These were real people who, at the time, could have been questioned.
And finally, we're back to the puzzle we started with, the explosive growth of the movement itself. Remember that paradox?
A movement built on a crucified Messiah should have died on the vine. The fact that it grew with such speed and held on so tightly, often in the face of brutal persecution, is a historical reality that just begs for an explanation.
Okay, so we have these 4 facts. How do they all fit together? Well, to get that, you have to understand just how strange and totally unique the early Christian proclamation was, even inside its own Jewish world.
So on the left, you see the standard Jewish belief about resurrection at the time. It was a big, general event that was supposed to happen at the very end of history, where all the good people would be raised together. But look at what the Christians were saying on the right. It was a complete curveball. One person resurrected, all by himself, right in the middle of history? Nobody was expecting that. It was a brand new, frankly shocking idea.
By claiming Jesus was raised, what the first Christians were really saying was something huge and theological. They were saying that the end of the world, God's great act of new creation, had actually broken into the present. Jesus wasn't just some weird exception. He was the firstfruits, the very beginning of a whole new reality.
So this is where it all comes together. According to the source material, the power of this argument is that the claim that God actually raised Jesus from the dead provides a single, coherent explanation for all 4 of our bedrock facts. It turns the shame of the cross into a divine victory. It explains why the core message was what it was, why they pointed to specific appearances as proof, and why this movement had such unbelievable, world-changing energy.
And that brings us right back to our main question. The argument we've explored today is that these 4 facts are historically solid. Jesus was crucified. His followers immediately proclaimed he was raised from the dead. They claimed to have seen him alive, and the church exploded out of a situation of total defeat. So the final question the source leaves us with is this: what single explanation best accounts for all of that data?